Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Phil Bazaire. I'm a faculty relations manager here in cooperative education at the University of Waterloo. I'm very happy to be here with you today to talk a bit more about preparing for your co-op journey here at Waterloo. All the students who are joining us here today, you're all excellent students because, well, you were admitted to Waterloo Engineering, and that's not an easy feat. So congratulations first and foremost. But you all have very different experience as well coming into this opportunity. For many of you, your first work term will be starting in winter 2021, depending on your stream, in which case you'll be starting to look for work in that very first fall semester when you're with us. And then for others, you'll be in a Stream 8 program. You'll have that first work term in the spring of 2021. So a little bit more time to prepare for cooperative education, but it is never too soon to be thinking about preparing for that first application for a job. Now, cooperative education is a large operation, as many of you know, at Waterloo, and we have a large team focused on all the various elements that need to come together to make co-op work for all the students that participate. We have many staff who are actively trying to develop job opportunities, and there's some unique challenges with that in this current climate. Other staff like myself work with faculty colleagues in an effort to build bridges between the academic experience that you'll be having in your engineering program with the workplace opportunities that you'll be experiencing as well. We also have a small army of career advisors in our Center for Career Action, which is connected to our department, and they specialize in helping students get that first co-op job, all the preparation, preparing resumes, all those different pieces, being successful in an interview environment, standing out from the crowd. That's what they specialize in. And in fact, they'll actually be in your classes virtually, of course, this year, but providing some instruction as part of your regular learning within engineering. So you'll have exposure to all of these different pieces in an effort to help you be successful at the end of the day. The point of all of this is that there's a lot of experience and expertise all at your fingertips from the second you begin in September. And the reality is a lot of that experience is being made available to you a little bit early as well. You've been able to benefit from the Waterloo Ready programming and from live chats like the one today. And all of this is in the hopes of getting you feeling prepared to get started on your co-op journey. For today, though, we really want to lean on the experience of some of our talented students, all of whom were in your shoes just a few short years ago. So we will invite Pirashan, Milena, and Patrick to share some of their experiences, and they'll also be handling some of the Q&A as we move through the presentation today. But without further ado, we'll get started here. And even though for many of us we are working remotely at the moment from home offices and whatnot, we still do acknowledge the entire Waterloo community acknowledges that we live and work on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. The University of Waterloo is situated on the Haldimand Tract, which is land that was promised to the Six Nations. It includes 10 kilometers on each side of the Grand River. Now, I would like to, before we get into speaking with our talented students, I do want to remind everyone who's joining us of your homework that hopefully you've all completed. In fact, this is really just a reminder. There was some pre-work that was provided to you. And if you have not seen this, it can be accessed through the Waterloo Ready site. So you can click in, I believe it's under the July 20th materials. But you'll be able to see this information. And what this really is an opportunity for you to start thinking about your resume now. As I said earlier, it's never too soon to start thinking about it. And part of the thinking that sometimes needs to go into this for students, particularly those who don't necessarily have a lot of work experience, is to start thinking like an employer, and specifically thinking about the kinds of skills that employers are looking for. So this exercise is meant to highlight some of those pieces. Once you can start thinking about what the employers want, then you can start thinking about how to articulate the different ways that you might have that experience or meet the expectations of that employer. So there's some good examples there that draw on, the idea of working in a customer service environment or being a tutor, or maybe, if you're handy and changing the oil in your parents' car. Those are all different pieces of your puzzle, your personal puzzle, that you can then think about how to articulate how you're meeting the needs of our employers. So if you've not already done that, please take the time. It's a really good exercise, especially as you're thinking about preparing, again, to begin your co-op studies at Waterloo. But we're not going to spend too much time on that or any more time on that today. Just a recap and a reminder that that is available for you. From there, we are certainly going to move to the rock stars of our show, the upper year students, to share their experiences, and they actually have their first co-op resumes that they can share for you. So they've got more experience and probably a very different looking resume now, but they'll be able to show you what that looks like. And of course, we'll have some question and answers for roughly half of the 60-minute session today. And we'll have a number of students, whether you're typing questions in now or during the Q&A portion, we do have students that are moderating that and able to respond as we go. Now, there is obviously a big elephant in the room, so to speak, which is that COVID-19 has obviously forced a lot of individuals, not just the University of Waterloo, but the broader community and society and the world at large, to adjust the way that we do things. So certainly we recognize that there are probably some questions regarding our own response to COVID-19. And the first thing, if you're not aware, the first thing to be aware of is that for fall 2020, instruction will be entirely online for our incoming students in order to limit that exposure. So from the very beginning, we've been trying to follow public health guidelines to the best of our ability. And the best place to get up-to-date information on our COVID-19 response is on the website on your screen, uwaterloo.ca/coronavirus. And in fact, if you go to any of our main websites, there's a link and a red banner at the very top of the screen that will take you to that same website listed there. So if you do have any questions, I would encourage you to take a read through that website, as you may find a number of FAQ sections listed there that will allow you to find the answers that you're looking for. Now, a quick comment on the question and answer option today for you. So many of you have likely been in video chats up to this point. We have disabled the chat function for today, and instead you'll see a Q&A option or a button that you can avail yourself of to ask any questions. And again, we have staff on hand to help work through those questions. Now, we will provide additional ways to communicate with us at the end of the presentation, such that if you have questions that you're not necessarily comfortable asking in a format such as this, or if by chance we don't happen to get to your question, you will have the opportunity to follow up with our staff afterward. Okay, and then lastly, before we get started, I do want to highlight, because we're all watching this from our various rooms and homes and whatnot, in case there are technical difficulties, this presentation is being recorded and it will be made available within a week. So you'll be able to find that on the website. And again, there'll be links so that you can follow up with any questions that you may have afterward. But without further ado, I would like to introduce our first student panelist, Pirashan. As you can see there, a chemical engineering student. Welcome, Pirashan. Thank you for participating today. And I would ask, maybe to get us started, if you just want to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience. You've listed some transferable skills there in the table, so maybe you can expand on that a little bit to get the conversation started.
So I'm Pirashan. I just finished my 3A term in chemical engineering. And I'm currently on my 4th work term with the University of Waterloo. But for my first co-op term, my position was a leak surveyor with HETEC. And for the column with most transferable skills, generally what that means is if in an interview, an interviewer asks me about a position, this is the point that I like to touch on the most. So for HETEC, I generally try to talk about my communication skills that I developed as a leak surveyor. And then my second co-op position was with Toyota. So that was my first time in, I guess, an engineering role. So the most transferable skill that I learned there was critical thinking using root cause analysis. And the reason I like to touch on that point is that it's one of the things that Toyota is well known for within the industry. So I like to use that because a lot of interviewers tend to notice that first off of the resume. So bringing that up also helps me out during the interview. My third co-op term was as a chemical engineer with Tremco. Um, and at Tremco, I did work on critical thinking using root cause analysis. However, you want to bring up different transferable skills from different jobs. So one thing that I like to point out from there is project management.
Great, thanks, Piershan. And I'll highlight as well that you are actively supporting the university community in your current role as a summer academy ambassador. So that's wonderful. And just as a bit of a homework project for you, you can give some thought to what transferable skills you're taking away from this experience as well. Now we'll slide over to the next one here, and this, for those of you who are joining us, this is a look at Piershan's first work term resume that he used. So take us through this if you can, Piershan, if you want to touch on, what you feel worked well for you, maybe what didn't work so well, certain pieces, maybe you can talk about why you chose to include them or not, but feel free to share a little bit more.
So I did blur out a few things here and there for privacy's sake, but going through it, one of the biggest things I noticed with first year students making resumes is that you tend to feel that you don't have enough experience to put on your resume. So a lot of people tend to overcompensate by putting a lot of information that might be redundant to employers. So I tried to keep it as short and sweet as possible. So I did have prior work experience. So I was a factory employee and also a convenience store cashier. So I had that under relevant experience. And although I am in chemical engineering, I tried to bring as much transferable skills as possible from those two positions that I could talk about during interviews. So for the factory employee, I spoke about WMIS training and safety data sheets because that's one thing that process engineers need to have training on. So I felt that that would stand out a bit. Being able to handle fast-paced, busy environment, that was just one point I felt would stand out. It would show that I work well under pressure. With the convenience store cashier, I was just putting out skills that I had to use during the time. So basic accounting skills, handling sales. So I guess it was me trying to show my independence and being able to work as a cashier because it's not an easy job. And one position that when I applied for was Toyota. So Toyota actually likes to compare themselves to McDonald's in the way that they work. So there's definitely places where you can find transferable skills to put on your resume. Don't think that any experience that you have doesn't stand out or it's not important enough. You just have to make sure you pick the right experiences. A lot of you probably have a lot of volunteer experience if you don't have any work experience. Same thing with the volunteer experience. You just got to pick out the points that really stand out and are transferable to the positions you want to apply for. For skills, I put down a few things that I was actually learning during my first term. So Autodesk, P&ID, I did not learn that in high school, but I knew that I would be learning it throughout the first term. So I decided to put it on my resume. Also MATLAB, Python, and C++. Depending on your program, you'll be learning different things throughout your first term. And I think it's highly recommended to put down some of the courses or some of the things that you'll be learning during your first 1A term. Also for training, I thought that Red Cross and WMIS were two things that stood out. So I put those in. I also think it's important to put your interests because sometimes interviewers like to talk about things other than work. So one of my interviewers actually, for I think 5-10 minutes out of a 30-minute interview, he was speaking to me about the NBA since I put basketball on my interests. So I felt like that helped me build a better connection with the interviewer. So I would recommend an interest section. And yeah, like I said before, keeping it short and sweet is very important.
That's great, thank you. And I like your comment about having a conversation about the NBA at one of my very first job interviews, which resulted in a co-op job myself.
Mm-hmm.
I was told after the fact that it was my personal interests that was one of the main reasons I received the interview in the first place. So you never know what's going to tweak the interviewer's interests. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the idea of, so you mentioned making sure that your resume spoke to what the employer was looking for, like we mentioned earlier. Now, in the co-op program, of course, students are applying to many jobs as part of the process. So to what extent did you, if you can think back, to what extent did you have to tweak your resume for the different kinds of employment opportunities that you were looking for?
So for first year, I think I only made 2 different versions. So this version that's posted up and then another one with slight modifications. But looking back on it, if I could go back, I would make various versions because there were different positions that I applied to, such as lab positions or process engineering positions. So there are different things that they're looking for in an employee. So for example, on Waterloo Works, there are sections where they post the required skills or the skills that they're looking for in a person. And what I do now is I make different resume versions for different employers using the keywords that they themselves post. Because what ends up happening is when they're going through your resume, those keywords stand out. Like you can see that I bolded MATLAB, Python, C++, and Autodesk. So say, for example, if I'm applying to a job that might be asking for MATLAB experience, the reason I bolded those few terms is because I want those things to stand out to the employer when they first look at the resume. Because a lot of employers, when they're looking at resumes, they're just skimming through a whole stack of them. So you really want your resume to stand out at first look.
Thank you. That's great, Pierre-Sean. We appreciate that. And don't worry, we'll hear more from Pierre-Sean as part of the Q&A as well. But thanks again.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have Milena, who's a student in our biomedical engineering program, which is an 8-stream program. So first work term would be in the spring for all the incoming students. So I'll invite Milena to share her screen, or not share her screen, but turn on her video and share a little bit about her experiences so far.
So hi everyone, my name is Milena Galashevich. I'm just about to finish my 2B biomedical engineering term. And yeah, I guess let's get started with my co-op terms. So I've been lucky enough to actually have quite a few jobs in biomedical engineering itself. It can be difficult to find something specifically related to that field just because usually I found that a lot of the jobs in biomedical engineering you need to have very technical skills, which can be difficult for you to have as an incoming first year student, but there's definitely opportunities for incoming students to still get co-op jobs in that field. So for example, in my first co-op term was at Niagara Health System in St. Catharines, Ontario, which is a hospital system, I guess. And yeah, so I was working in the biomedical engineering department, but I was doing like a mixture of 3D printing and developing the initiative of 3D printing in the entire Niagara region. So usually in a biomedical engineering division in a hospital, they actually work hands-on with the machines, but because I wasn't certified to do that, I was able to actually learn a lot about the machines, but I couldn't work with them hands-on. Nonetheless, I still did a lot of development for devices within the hospital that were low risk. So I was 3D printing pieces that could assist doctors in processes and, like, for example, clip-ons to machines, or finding new ways to decrease costs in hospitals. So instead of buying new parts, I would design them and 3D print them. Also, while this was going on, I was working with an oncologist to 3D print tumors or patient anomalies found in CAT scans. So I would get these 2D CAT scans and generate models, 3D print them, and then they would be used for patient education to teach patients, what's going on and how are we going to approach this problem. So it was definitely a very different kind of biomedical engineering job, and I learned a lot. Another perk of working at a hospital is I was able to watch a lot of surgeries, so that was a unique experience, and I definitely saw how biomedical technologies and devices are being used directly live, and you saw it all. So it's definitely really interesting, and that's just the perk of having a co-op in a hospital. My second co-op job was a medical device associate, or also a quality assurance associate at Biointegral Surgical. So Biointegral Surgical is a company that creates creates cardiovascular products made out of biomodified tissue. So to translate that a little is they use porcine or bovine pericardium or biological tissue, so from cows or pigs, and they actually treat the tissue and they develop biological products that are then implanted in patients, specifically in the cardiovascular system. So for example, they would recreate the aorta and then implant it in patients. And this product specifically used to be available in the US, and it is now available only in Europe. This was really interesting, and from a quality assurance position, you definitely had to do a lot of attention to detail. That's my transferable skill. Quality assurance is something that a lot of biomeds get exposed to one way or another. And this is because biomedical engineering is so heavy in regulation, especially when you're working with medical devices. And that's one thing that you will probably have experienced almost in any co-op job, is the ISO regulations or the CE regulations. It's an inevitable part, but it's a really interesting part that'll definitely help a lot when you go on to design your own projects throughout your university career. So yeah, throughout that co-op, I also got to work with a medical director who actually started the company. And I was doing a lot of marketing too, specifically to surgeons and professionals within the field. So it wasn't just, kind of creating information about the product that wasn't up to level. I was still learning how to use proper medical terms, how to communicate to medical professionals, and really understand how the product works on a biological level. And in the fall, I will be having a co-op job as a clinical research associate at IntelliJoint Surgical. So when you come in, hopefully in the winter or in the spring of 2021, IntelliJoint is a company that is very often seen in E7 or E5. They're located in Kitchener, and they created a device used for orthopedic surgery that allows for patient calibration. And now they're developing another product for knee surgery. And I believe that's where I'll be working on with the clinical research department.
Awesome. Thanks, Melina. That's great. I have to say, your very first transferable skill that you listed there, using resources to learn independently, really stuck with me, because I think that is one of the pieces about being in a new work environment, especially as a junior student, that often can be surprising, that students don't expect that their supervisors expect so much of them, because they have their own responsibilities and tasks. So that's such an important thing to learn at an early work term, that if you can run with an idea on your own and pursue that and do the independent learning, it's all that much more valuable to an employer. So that's really, really important.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess I didn't touch quite on that, but in that specific job, using resources to learn independently at my 3D printing job was to learn how to use softwares on my own to create these models. And I know that sounds really intimidating, but I definitely learned throughout my first year. And just as a student in Waterloo, they prepare you for this. You will find thousands and thousands of resources, be it online or from the university. And the people at your co-op job will also be very helpful in helping you find the right resources to develop these skills. So it may seem intimidating, but you are definitely resource prepared to actually learn on your own.
For sure. That's great. Now here's a sneak peek at your former resume. So same idea here. If you could take us through a little bit about why you included the pieces that you did, and maybe what you would change looking back on it, or maybe what you wouldn't change. If you could just expand on that a little bit, that would be great.
Yeah, 100%. So this is my first year resume. It's a little different than the previous one. There's way more information on here. So I would definitely cut down on the information. And I think that's one thing that, as Pierre mentioned, that one thing as an incoming first-year student is you don't have enough. That's your fear, that you don't have enough skills to put on there. And I think that's where I came from a little bit, which is why I'd go in here and I would definitely pick out what's most important, because as mentioned, when people go through resumes, they pick out the most important things. And when you have so much thrown on here, it could be a lot, and they might, sometimes out of laziness because they don't want to, they might just skip over your resume. It's happened before. I've been at some co-op interviews at my previous co-ops. It's just too much. So definitely I would go in here and I would pick out, and if I can't pick out and I would still have all this information, I would learn how to phrase my skills in a much more cohesive and shortened manner. So for example of this is instead of going on and expanding about communication or being redundant and like, hey, I know how to communicate really well, I would make an emphasis on that in one of my experiences and make sure that's a pointer that, hey, while I was working at KJK Pharmacy, I learned how to communicate really well, and this is evidence of it. And when I was going to my next experience, I would emphasize another skill that I have, so that when you would be going through the resume, you would have concrete examples of how I have developed and applied every single skill. In my summary of qualifications, one thing I regret not doing more is applying or mentioning more of the skills that I learned in class. This is one thing that I really underestimated, and I was so focused on trying to find skills and qualifications from my high school experience or through volunteer experience that I kind of overlooked the course material that's actually quite applicable in the work field. So an example of this would be like root cause diagrams as engineers in your design courses. You were going to learn so many different methods that are always directly applied in your co-op. So I would definitely go back and find all those different systems and projects that I learned, and I would put them in the summary of qualifications. In terms of awards and achievements, that's something that I continuously develop because we achieve different things. So that was something I just, coming out of high school, these are my awards and achievements, but I would also minimize them and choose achievements that directly correlate to skills that I have. That's on that section. In terms of experience, again, because now I have more co-ops and I'm like learning more from different jobs, I would start taking away volunteer experience or redundancies, and I would just continue listing more co-ops. But as an incoming student, I had a whole list of volunteer experiences, I'm sure many of you do. Try not to put all of them on there. And I saw this when I was helping my other friends do resumes, is pick out the volunteer experience that's most important and that most directly shows your employer your skills. In terms of design projects, I thought this was one section of my resume that a lot of employers really liked, and they asked me a lot of questions on. And this is because design projects directly show you soft skills, and they show you how you applied your different like technical skills in concrete ways. So for example, design project that we did in our first year was creating a toy for children with Down syndrome to help them learn. So this automatically shows you're good at collaboration, you're good at teamwork, you're good at time management, you're good at efficiency, but you can also use SolidWorks. You can also do some electrical engineering. You can, all these different components that go into making a project, give them a specific example of how you applied your skill set. And finally, I'd also cut down my intro section and develop my experience section a little bit more.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Melina. And I really appreciate your comments about maybe highlighting the learning that you've had in the classroom, because I think what's important to remember is unless an employer is actually a graduate of our program, which most of the time they're looking at students from different programs, they probably don't understand our curriculum. So they're sometimes left guessing. It's like, oh, does the student have this skill or that skill? Are they learning it in this course or that course? So sometimes taking a few of those key pieces from your courses and then putting it front and center so that they can see that, and right away there's no question asked, oh, this student has what I'm looking for from their academic background plus all this other experience. That can really be one of those pieces that pops out very easily for them. So that's great. Thank you so much.
No problem.
And last but not least, we have Patrick, who's also from the Biomedical Engineering program. Welcome, Patrick, and thank you for being with us today. And I think I was really excited that Patrick agreed to be with us, because I think Patrick, as you'll see, and he'll take us through his experience, despite being in the same program, has some very different experiences to share. And I think there's a really important message there. So I'll leave it to you, Patrick, to take it from here if you want to share a little bit more about your experience from this point.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, as Phil said, I'm Patrick, and I'm in the same cohort as Milena, 2B Biomed. But yeah, for sure, we definitely have very different co-op experiences. So I decided to focus more on software. So as you'll see, both of the co-ops I've completed so far were software development. And that was kind of just because in the future, I kind of want to do, I'm thinking right now of medical devices. So I was thinking about getting a really strong technical background in software and hardware, so that I can later apply those to developing medical devices. So for my first co-op, I was at a financial technology company, Big River Technologies. And I was on the internal team. So I worked on the company website as well as the company database. And I worked on a very interdisciplinary team. It was the internal team. So we had business analysts, we had sales and marketing people, project managers, we worked with the CEO, all working together to specifically on the website. So just working with all those people, I really thought that one of the big technical transferable skills that I learned from that was project management and interdisciplinary collaboration. And that's definitely something that I like to highlight in interviews. And then, yeah, as I said, my second co-op was also a software development position. So I worked at Ford in Ottawa, and I was an embedded software developer. So working on code that went on components that went inside the car. And I really, really liked this co-op experience. I learned so much. I had a really awesome mentor, which is a good thing that I hear from a lot of other co-ops. Sometimes you get to work directly with full-timers, and they really like to share their skills with you. So yeah, so I just learned a lot about different concepts of software development and specifically embedded software, which I'll be able to apply later to biomedical devices. And then I like the co-op so much that I'm actually going back in the fall, and we're starting a new project from scratch. So it'll be I'm really looking forward to that.
That's great. Thanks, Patrick. And I was just going to ask that if you were expecting similar responsibilities for this second go around with Ford.
Yeah, so I'll be in the same position, but yeah, as I said, the code base that I was working on last term, they're completely rebuilding it and refactoring it. So just starting all of the classes from scratch, essentially. So I did actually get to do a lot of just development and like not only defects and stuff at the last term. But yeah, this term I'll definitely be doing a lot more development, just a lot of design and development as well. So yeah, really looking forward to that.
That's great. Thanks. And again, I think this really highlights that there is no one path that students should take or must take with their work experience. I mean, often with an engineering degree, the academic components of the program are largely set, with the exception of some elective courses, but you have a good sense of what the courses will be. But there really is a sense of an ability to choose your own adventure with respect to your work terms. And I think this is a really good illustration of that. So thank you.
Yeah, and also with that, just because we had two software courses in first year, and those really got me interested in software. And I just knew that I wanted to go further with that. So yeah.
That's great.
So this is my resume from first term. There's definitely some things that I would fix about it. I'll leave those to the end. I'll just start by going through the different sections. So I put these skills and abilities at the top, just so the employers can quickly see the skills that I highlighted and how they relate to the qualifications that the employer is looking for. So for each skill, I made sure to talk about where I developed that skill, and then also those skills I tried to further highlight throughout the rest of the resume. And I did something a little bit different than most people. Most people will put the experience section next, near the top, but I decided to put my project section next. I did this because my experiences weren't really overly related, and I thought I just had a lot more content that was more related to the jobs that I was applying to in my project section. I was lucky enough to get on 2 design teams in first year, so those are really good to put on there, and also just putting the different technologies that I learned that I may be using in my co-op terms. So Git, different languages, you'll see like C++ in there, sorry. C, yeah, different things. Also other things, I had two different hackathons on there. One of them I ended up winning, so I talked about that in a couple different interviews. So those are really good experiences that you get to learn a lot from. And then I also have a work term project, a design project that we did in first term, as well as a high school just personal project, which are also very good. If you don't have too much work experience, just doing personal projects can show that you've learned different skills. And then in my experience section, in first year, I had a position on residence council. So I put that on there. And just to highlight here, one of the things that I was told in first year when creating your resume is when you do your bullet points, you try and say what you did, how you did it, and what you achieved. So I didn't totally do that throughout all of the bullet points on my resume. But as you can see there, I kind of said, manage spending using Excel and successfully ran meetings. They also say if you have any numbers, try and highlight those. So that's one example of a bullet point that kind of follows that format. I would have liked to do that more throughout the rest of my resume. And yeah. And then I just have Tim Hortons. I was an orientation leader in high school. And then this one is surprisingly talked about the most in my interviews. I don't think I've had an interview where I didn't talk about this. Most people haven't seen a job experience that starts in 2003, so when I was 3 years old. But I live on a farm, so employers always got to laugh about that. And the position that I got that term, the person that was interviewing me was also a farmer, so we talked a lot about that. So any other interests or extracurriculars that you have, always put on there, just because you might relate to the employer and talk and get a connection that way. And then, as Milena mentioned, in the education section, I tried to highlight different courses that I did in first year and the different skills. So I have C++ and C#, which are the languages, and then I have our CADing class and our design classes. So definitely highlighting those. And I also have a small activities and interest section. So as far as the things that I would change, as you can see, the resume is very compressed and kind of hard to read. The spacing is not very good. It's kind of hard to distinguish between different experiences and projects. So for my next resume, I put it into 2 columns, like the other 2 resumes you just saw. I also added some color and tried to take out some of the content that wasn't really adding too much to it. I always tried to put 2, like on this one, tried to put 2 or 3 bullets for each one when it wasn't always necessary. And I found a lot of, there's a big debate between 1 and 2 columns. It's like split half and half, I think. So I would recommend making different versions of your resume when you're developing it, different formats, and just, you'll really learn a lot doing that. You'll get to see which ones are better. I didn't do that in first term, but I think that's definitely a good idea. Another thing is trying to get as many people to look at your resume as possible. There's so many different resources. There's Sika, you can get upper years to review them. There's all your friends. We, in first year, just a group of my friends, we all sat down, passed our resumes around, got some pen, went over them, gave suggestions. There's also NSOC. There's just so many resume critique resources. So yeah, I would definitely recommend getting it out there as much as possible.
Awesome. Thanks, Patrick. And yeah, I completely agree that I know you're looking back at your resume in hindsight now, but there really is no one magic perfect format for a resume. Individuals will have their own stylistic preferences, and so will employers. I mean, I have this conversation often with my own colleagues when we hire co-op students. And we never agree on what our priority is when we're looking at a resume or a cover letter, all the different pieces. So I think it's important to recognize that there's different styles. There's no one perfect resume, and then what really matters is highlighting all those pieces that speak to the employer about what it is that you do, what's going to stand out, what are the skills that they need that you're bringing to the table. So a big thank you to all 3 of you for agreeing to share your old resumes and sharing a little bit more about yourselves. Now, we're a bit over time, but I think everyone will probably agree that hearing from the students and their own experiences was really, really valuable. I know I always find it interesting to hear the different perspectives. We're going to move into the Q&A portion, but before we do, I just want to highlight that if there are specific questions, again, that are not being answered today, or you want to follow up with us separately outside of this venue, there are ways to do that. As students, you'll have the opportunity to actually book co-op consults with our career advisor experts once you begin. In fact, that might even be starting very soon if it hasn't already. And as well, some of you might have questions that venture more into the academic territory. So there's an email address there as well that will connect you to the engineering undergraduate office where you can have some of those questions answered. But I think I will stop sharing my screen. I'd like to introduce Danielle Cross, who I think is going to take over the moderating duties as we move into the Q&A portion of our session.
Thank you so much, Phil, and thank you so much to our student presenters. I know we've really enjoyed hearing from you, and you've answered some great questions already. We've had a ton of questions come in through the Q&A, so I'll get right to those. I would actually like to start with you, Phil, if that's okay. We had some students asking about the general co-op timeline for the fall. So can you kind of walk us through what that looks like? And I know there's a great website that has some important dates, so we'll share a link to that in the chat. But generally, what does it look like for students when they start in the fall?
Yeah, so, and I think the students have probably lived through this, so they could speak to it as well. But by and large, believe it or not, the conversation around co-op begins in the very first week of classes. So I made reference to a program earlier called Co-op Fundamentals for Engineering. So those are embedded lectures, if you will, and they're embedded in actual core courses that all the engineering students will have. So week one, they're starting that conversation and they're being led by those career advisor experts. And the conversation starts with things like, let's start thinking about articulating your skills. Let's start thinking about a resume. Because by the time we get to I'm going to say about week 3 of the term, we're still in September at this point, job applications are actually starting to get posted on our system, and those will be released to the students. So there's a bit of compressed activity at the very start, even though they've just arrived, to try and get them thinking about those resumes so that they can be ready to apply. Built into that first 3 weeks, there are resume critiques that are happening. So you're not only just being given instructions necessarily, you're being coached on how to articulate your own skills effectively. And then there's an opportunity to sit down, or I guess in this case it'd be virtually this year, but of course sitting down with a senior student who will actually give you a live critique of your resume so you can think about ways to improve that. So then those job postings start moving into interviews, probably by the time we get to the month of October. So if you'll think of it this way, the first month is really about getting ready for the application process. The second month, largely, is getting into our main round of interviews, if you want to think of it that way. And the way that process is structured is that all the applications, and there's usually thousands of them, all those postings that were available for students to see, they apply for as many as they would like effectively. And then all of those interviews are handled within a roughly 1 month window. And the idea being, there's not really any job offers being communicated. There's lots of employers, interviewing lots of different students. So we sort of go through that process of just interviews. And at the end, all of the employers will submit their rankings, their preferences. This is my top student. This is my second student, my third student. So then that gets released to the students. They'll get to see whether they have a job, whether employers have ranked them. And then the students get to rank back. So we call this our matching process. Effectively, if a student has a job offer, they can choose to accept that offer, or maybe they would prefer a different opportunity. Maybe they have multiple offers to juggle. That doesn't always happen with our first work term students, but it certainly can. But in effect, the process is aiming to pair, if you will, as many students and employers into jobs, that are making them that they'd be happy with on both sides. And then I would say for the rest of the term, the process kind of continues on. It's a little bit different, a little bit more compressed cycles where we're running those interviews and postings and those matching processes. That will continue for another month or so, but it's just turning around a little bit faster. But the bulk of activities in that early round cycle. Most first work term students will find that first job in the later rounds, traditionally. So my caution that I always put out there is there's a lot of effort up front, and they go through that main round, and sometimes there's a bit of discouragement. But that's pretty, I would say that's pretty typical for a first work term student, because again, you don't have necessarily as much experience as some of the more senior students who are also looking for jobs for their co-op terms. So it's a long process, and I always encourage students to take the long view, especially on that first work term, because there's going to be more opportunities coming, and lots of ways for them to get support if they're running into trouble, to try to make sure it's as positive an experience as it can be.
Fantastic. Thank you, Phil. And I know Erica has shared a link in the chat there to the co-op important dates. So the students online can check those out as well. So I want to switch over to our students. And I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about your interview experiences. So how do you prepare for interviews? And are there any common questions that you're normally asked in an interview? I know a lot of you mentioned that you spoke about personal hobbies or something interesting that you put on your resume. But what are some of the other common questions that you get asked during an interview, and what are you doing to prepare for those? So maybe Patrick, can we start out with you, and then we'll go to Milena and Pira as well.
Sorry, I gotta unmute myself. So yeah, for sure. So as far as interview questions that are common, I don't think I've ever not been asked the very common question, just first question in the interview, tell me about yourself. So it's definitely a really good idea to practice that answer, really get that really well developed, and include as much as you can that really makes you stand out. Preparing, you can definitely do practice interviews just with your friends, or there's different resources and people on campus that offer interview practice. Yeah, maybe go to one of the other students for more to add to that.
Great. Yeah, Milena, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think one thing that I always do before I have an interview is research the company that I'm interviewing for. And that's just out of kind of being prepared. Sometimes they may ask you some skills directly related to some projects that you can learn about online and stuff. So it shows that you're really keen about getting the job, and that you know about the company, and that you're really interested in it. So that's definitely like the first thing I always do. The second one, and the question that I have been getting asked in almost every interview I've had since I started Waterloo, is talking about time management. And I think this is really important, is because at a lot of companies that are working, I mean, at least I think I can speak for medical devices, is there's a lot of people who are competing against them, and they want to hire students who have a lot of skills and who work really well, but also work efficiently. So kind of that work smart, not hard. And they want to see evidence for that. So that's one question I always get asked. And one more question is to talk about your weaknesses and how you overcame them. So that's an easy one to prepare for too, because nobody's perfect, and they want to know unless you are perfect, but if you have any weaknesses, how you overcame them. So that's one thing to also prepare a really good answer for, and it's an easy way to depict a lot more of your skills. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Milena. Pira, do you want to share some of your experiences?
Like Milena said, doing some research about the company prior to the interview is really important. For my very first interview, I actually kind of bombed it. I wasn't very prepared for it at all, but I took it as a learning curve. But one thing that they did was they asked me what I knew about the company and the things that they did. So I knew a few things, but I didn't really go in depth when I researched the company and looked them up. So looking back on it, whenever I have an interview now, I make sure I know exactly what's happening in the company, maybe some recent news that they might have. Like one interview that I had recently, the company, they won a grant from the government for a certain project. So I was able to speak to the interviewer about that, and they were pretty impressed with the fact that I was actually up to date with the news in the company. And one other thing that I think interviewers love asking is, what's your biggest weakness? And when speaking on that, I think it's important to give an actual weakness, and then give a way that you're working on fixing that weakness.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. That's a very common question that we always get asked, and we need a good answer prepared for that. So thanks for sharing. That's awesome. Can you all speak about the competition for co-op roles? Do you find that you're generally applying for the same jobs within your program that your peers are applying for? And what's that competition like within your program? Patrick, maybe we can go back to you first and we'll go in the same order again, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. So it definitely happens quite a bit that, so you actually get to see, when you get your interview, you get to see all the other students that have the same interview as you. So it definitely happens quite a bit that you'll see a couple other people from your program. It's often, our cohort at least is very close. We're all super friendly with each other. So we'll like congratulate each other on getting the same interview. Yeah, there's never any bad stories about not being super like kind and helpful or anything like that. Yeah, I think everyone's just cheering each other on, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely add on to Patrick that yeah, we're in the same cohort, so we all like want to help each other. Even though it is competitive, the whole point is to help each other out and to grow together. So I think our cohort's really good in supporting each other in that way. And if somebody's not too keen about a job that they applied for, sometimes they'll even help you out and be like, help you out about what they're looking for. So communicating between each other. But again, that depends on your cohort. In terms of competition, I think in my first year, it was a little bit of intimidating when I got an interview and I saw upper years where I was having an interview for a company where upper years were also applying for, and it could be a little bit discouraging. But my word of advice is not to be discouraged, because even though they have experience, you also have skills and you kind of have to believe in yourself. So yeah, just, go into the interview and just try your best, and whatever will happen will happen. Worst case, you learn something new, right?
For the competition, same as with their cohort. I think our cohort as well. Everybody tends to congratulate each other if they see another person gets the same interview. I think one time with Toyota, because they interview up to 100 people in one term, 4 of the people in our class got the same interview, and we kind of shared with each other what the interviewers asked. Which I guess not a lot of people do, because it is a competition to get a position. And also speaking on seeing upper years getting the same positions. In first year, a couple of my friends, what they would do is they would go on LinkedIn and they would look up every single person who has the same interview as them. And then they would start panicking because everybody has a lot of experience and they're seeing that they've already worked for other companies. But my word of advice would be same as Milena, just there's a reason why you got picked for the interview. Don't doubt yourself. Even if other upper years are getting picked, you have skills and you can definitely get the position if you try.
Awesome. Thank you, Perrin. We actually had some students asking in the Q&A about some of the jobs that are specific to chemical engineering. Could you share, just maybe some of the titles or some of the companies that you've seen posted specifically for chemical engineering?
So I think Toyota is a pretty big one. They do take a lot of chemical engineers for their paint department and plastics department. I've seen pharmaceutical companies such as Apotex, so they take on chemical engineers for process engineering positions. You might see titles such as project engineering positions. They also take on lab assistants. So as a chemical engineer, I do believe a lot of my fellow students take on lab assistant positions. My position with Tremco was a split, I think 60-40 between chemical engineering, so process engineering, and working in the lab. So I think lab work is something that a lot of chemical engineers tend to do. But yeah, one of my friends, he's in chemical engineering as well. He decided to focus on product management, which is something that not a lot of chemical engineers do. But then again, your program does not limit you to certain jobs. You can always do what you want to do. So yeah.
I think, yeah, that's a really great point. I've actually hired chemical engineering students several times to work on my team in the Faculty of Engineering. And it's a kind of a non-traditional, more soft skills role, but they've done really well and, learned some important skills in those roles too. So yeah, Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can add to that as well, and this connects back to the conversation about competing with senior students as well. What we hear over and over again from many, many employers is that enthusiasm often trumps experience. There are often senior students or students that on paper may seem more qualified that often, not often, but occasionally will approach an interview with a bit more of an attitude of, well, I am the right person for this job, so you should hire me. Whereas often the students with less experience might feel like they have less to lose. And going into that experience prepared and enthusiastic about that job really leaves its mark. I think the first impression that you set in the first 30 seconds that you walk into an interview room makes a very big difference, whether you are a more junior student or whether you're looking for an opportunity that's maybe a little bit outside of the box or outside of the more traditional jobs that you might expect for your program.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. That's a great point as well. Some students were also asking, how many jobs did you apply to as a first-year student, and how many interviews did that translate to? So I'd like to ask each of you that, and I have a theory because I've done a couple of these sessions now, but maybe Patrick, did you want to start us off?
Yeah, for sure. So there's rounds of applying to jobs. So I think the first round you get 50 applications, and then I think it goes up to 300 applications. And in the term that I applied in first year, for some reason they also hired the limit, so I think it went up to like 500 or something. I specifically, just me, I think I applied to 75 jobs and got 4 interviews throughout the entire process. In first year, most people, I would say, don't get their job in the first 2 rounds. So don't get discouraged about that. Keep applying, and don't maybe be a little bit more open with what you apply to. But yeah, don't get discouraged if you don't get in the main round. Everyone applies to a ton of jobs. So yeah.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I think in the first round, I applied to like 38 jobs, got no interviews. And then in main round, I think I applied to like 111 jobs. Because in the spring, it tends to be much more difficult just because there's so many students applying for the spring term. I only got 1 interview, and that was the job I got. And I had it, I think, 2 days before our first exam. So don't be discouraged. There's still a chance. I know I was feeling pretty down because a lot of my friends already had jobs. But in the end, like, it was worth the wait. I got a really cool job. And sometimes it just comes down to that the co-op employers haven't posted the job right when the co-op term begins. And I know that was the case when I was working at my next job when they were getting ready to hire the next student. They didn't post until like October. So that's not the beginning of the school term. And it doesn't mean you're going to get a worse job. Sometimes it has no correlation. Just persevere through it.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, Milena. Sometimes jobs don't get posted in the first round because of the employer just waiting to hear back on funding or approvals and things like that. So in continuous, there are still awesome jobs available. And so it makes sense to keep applying. Pira, how about yourself?
I think for first term, I applied to 50, so like the limit. I probably applied to like 45, and then I thought, you know what, like I should apply to as many as I can. So I just applied to another 5 that I found interesting. And yeah, I didn't find my job until I think when exams started, so in continuous round. And I got maybe 3 interviews that term, and my last interview was the job that I got. The first job that I actually got wasn't related to engineering at all. And that does tend to happen, but I didn't take it as a downfall. I decided to put it on my resume and look for transferable skills. So it's not the end of the world if your job that you're looking for in a certain position isn't what you get first term. You can always push through, and then second term or third term, find the job that you really want.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great point. Phil, yeah, go ahead.
I try to always advise students that co-op is often like, when I think of reality television, it's like a journey. So we do have students that sometimes come in with a really specific job in mind. But that's often something that you should sort of envision as the job that you want to work toward. And there's various steps along the way in those other work terms that can help you get there. So I think having those realistic expectations that you may not have the perfect job initially, but it may be a job that's going to help you get there. That's often a good approach.
That's a great point as well. Thanks, Phil. We're almost ready to wrap up. I did want to ask you one more question live, and then I'll turn things back to Phil. But some students were asking what they can do over the summer as perhaps a side project or something like volunteer, etc., to add some qualifications and skills to their resume. Do you guys have any advice for things that the students can do over the next few weeks before they start in September that might be helpful for their first co-op job? Patrick, did you want to start us off?
Yeah, I can start. So it does depend on what kind of job you're looking to get. A lot of jobs in first year a lot of people do end up getting software positions, and it's totally fine if you don't have any software experience right now. You'll definitely learn in your first year probably. I'm pretty sure most engineering programs have courses for that. But yeah, if you want to take a coding class, learn a language, do a software project, start a GitHub, anything like that. A lot of people make personal websites. Well, not a lot of people, but I've definitely seen some people do it. So it depends on where your experience is, what you're trying to do. You can do a hardware project if you know Arduino. There's also online tutorials for everything. So even if you don't have that many skills, just looking at what somebody else has done and yeah.
Helena, did you want to share? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I just cut out there a little bit. But I think the one thing I'd also recommend, just because it's pretty difficult to do volunteering right now, which I found was quite helpful, at least for the biomedical field, was to definitely kind of, is what Patrick said, is to do a lot of projects on your own if possible. And there's, like he said, an extensive amount of resources online, even on LinkedIn Learning, on the Waterloo website. Try to develop projects that you can add onto your resume. Just as I mentioned before, that was, I think, one way I won over a lot of my employers during the interview process, is showing how I, learned a skill by myself and applied it in a very, very obvious way, and had a way to just show them that I could do it instead of just talking about it.
So before going into first year, I remember that summer, I was just Googling a lot of things. I was checking up on the different languages that chemical engineers might use. So I saw like MATLAB, Python in there. And one thing I did that summer is I did teach myself VBA. So I would say Google is your best friend. You can literally learn anything you want. I just watched YouTube videos, worked on my own projects. And that was one thing that employers did enjoy hearing about. Not just the fact that I knew VBA, but more so the fact that I taught myself something. It shows that you're an independent learner and that you strive towards goals and you set your own goals and you can achieve what you set your mind to.
That is awesome advice. Thank you so much, Para. Thank you again to all of our students. You were fantastic in responding to these questions, and thanks to our team behind the scenes answering the Q&A as well. I'll turn things back over to Phil to wrap up. But once again, if we had a question that you didn't get to, please feel free to email us, firstyearengineering@uwaterloo.ca, and Phil will share some other resources as well. But thanks so much, and I'm glad you could all join us today.
Great, and thank you, Danielle, for keeping us on track. And again, thanks to the panelists. It's so much more insightful to be hearing from students who are going through this process right now and have been there as first-year students. So we really appreciate your insight. And as well to the moderators behind the scenes. We're not seeing you, but thank you for all of your efforts in responding to the questions as they have come in. So just a couple last-minute notes here. This was mentioned briefly earlier, the idea of virtual drop-in appointments for first-year students. So this, in fact, happens on a regular basis during the academic year. So students of all levels can book appointments with our career advisors to get some of their expertise. But for all the incoming students, this is something that you can do right now. So starting this week, back on Monday, they did open up virtual appointments for the incoming first-year class. They're just quick 15-minute virtual drop-ins, but it's the opportunity to meet with one of our career advisors, career leaders, to get some initial early stage support with the idea of preparing a resume, getting those job application documents together, getting ready for the work search, interviews, the whole co-op process. All of those topics are within bounds, and they run from 8:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern time here in Ontario. So I would encourage you to please take advantage of that, because they're wonderful resources for you to get started on the right foot with respect to your co-op experience at Waterloo. And that is all we have for you today. Thank you once more for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you all virtually, at least,